A notification buzzed on Jerome Walker's phone at 4:30 in the morning, but he was already dressed and sitting at the edge of his mattress in the pre-dawn darkness. For the past half hour, he'd been calculating expenses in his head like a ritual he couldn't escape. Rent $950. Power bill $212. Food if he rationed carefully $300. Daniel's school supplies $180. His brain functioned as a worn-out adding machine that refused to shut down. He stood up slowly, attempting to move silently so he wouldn't disturb his 15-year-old son sleeping on the fold-out sofa in their narrow Memphis apartment. The metal frame groaned despite his caution. From the adjacent wall came the muffled noise of the neighbor's television set, already broadcasting some pre-dawn shopping program. The coffee pot rumbled and hissed, spreading the one small comfort Jerome permitted himself throughout their cramped kitchen. Acceptable coffee. Nothing fancy, just good enough to make him feel like a person again. Jerome had turned 34 last month but carried himself like someone approaching 50. His palms were weathered from years scrubbing office floors. His spine protested from the graveyard warehouse shifts, and the soles of his feet had memorized every uneven section of pavement between their building and the breakfast spot where he picked up weekend shifts. 3 separate jobs filled his schedule, yet somehow the bills kept multiplying. The arithmetic refused to balance. It felt like pouring water into a container that leaked from the bottom. He detected movement from Daniel on the couch. "Dad." His son's voice emerged rough from sleep. "Close your eyes, son. You've got 60 more minutes. All 3 shifts today." Jerome filled his mug, watching the vapor climb upward like an unanswered prayer. "Only 2. Got the evening off from the restaurant. So you'll be back by 10 o'clock instead of after midnight. That's basically a holiday." He couldn't help but grin through the weariness. Daniel had picked up his way of laughing through hardship, the survival mechanism that kept your head above water when drowning seemed easier. The boy was solid. Maintained straight A's despite completing assignments by the glow of his cell phone after their power got disconnected twice in the past 12 months. Never griped about second-hand clothing or surviving on instant noodles most of the week. He was owed a better life than Jerome could provide. "Rest up," he said, collecting his keys. "Love you." "Love you too, Dad." The door latched behind him, and Jerome walked down 4 levels of stairs since the lift had stopped functioning back in March. Beyond the building, Memphis remained cloaked in shadow, the city exhaling peacefully before the morning rush arrived. He covered 8 blocks on foot to reach the transit stop, his breath forming clouds in the crisp November morning. The corporate tower he maintained sat in the business district. All reflective surfaces and metal framework and the type of effortless wealth that never stressed over monthly payments. He sanitized bathrooms for executives who earned more in 7 days than he collected in 12 months. He cleared waste bins overflowing with partially consumed meals that cost more than his weekly food allowance. He buffed boardroom surfaces where choices got made that would never touch people in his position. By 9 o'clock in the morning, he was punching in at the distribution center, stacking crates, reading barcodes, shifting merchandise from one zone to another in a continuous cycle that set his shoulders on fire and turned his thoughts to static. The floor manager, a guy named Rick who reeked of tobacco and superiority, enjoyed reminding the crew how easily they could be replaced. "Walker," he snapped at Jerome during the break period. He'd taken his lunch 5 minutes ahead of schedule because his shift had begun 5 minutes behind. "You think you're different? You think the policies don't include you?" Jerome held his response, buried his frustration, and offered an apology because this paycheck mattered, because Daniel needed proper footwear, because the electricity payment was coming due in 3 days. He arrived home at 8 that night to discover Daniel stationed at their compact kitchen table. Coursework fanned out around him like he was constructing a bunker of knowledge. His son glanced up as Jerome entered, and he recognized it instantly, the anxiety Daniel attempted to mask. The manner in which he'd adapted to bearing weight at an age when worry should have been foreign. "How'd it go today?" Daniel asked. "Typical. School all right? Got my trigonometry exam returned. Scored a 96. Jerome's fatigue receded for a brief instant. He moved across the room and pressed a kiss to Daniel's forehead. "That's my boy. So proud of you. Dad, I've been considering something. Maybe I should find work, just a few hours. Couple guys from my grade stock shelves at the market." "Absolutely not." His tone left no space for debate. "Your responsibility is education. That's your ticket forward." "But Dad." "No, Daniel, I'm serious." His son didn't push back, though Jerome caught the shame flickering in his expression. 15 years breathing and already feeling accountable for his father's burdens. It shattered something inside Jerome that words couldn't reach. The following morning repeated the familiar pattern. Alert at 4:30, coffee, the transit ride, the corporate building, the warehouse, the bone-deep weariness that had taken up permanent residence in his body. He was heading back from the bus route, his feet throbbing, when he spotted something odd, a beige envelope secured to his apartment entrance. His immediate assumption, eviction papers. His chest tightened, but the envelope appeared too refined, too formal. He twisted the key in the lock, announced himself to Daniel, and cautiously tore it open. The letterhead displayed Morrison and Blake, Estate Law Firm, Charlotte, North Carolina. Jerome's fingers began trembling before he absorbed the opening sentence. "Dear Mr. Walker, this correspondence serves to inform you that you have been designated as the exclusive heir in the estate of Clayton Walker, who passed away on October 3rd of this year. As administrators of Mr. Walker's final testament, we are obligated to notify you of your inheritance, which encompasses real estate holdings situated in Ridgefield, North Carolina. We request your attendance at our firm at your earliest opportunity to review the inheritance terms and property transfer documentation. Please reach out to our office to arrange a consultation. Respectfully, Theodore Morrison, lead attorney." Jerome studied it 3 times, then once more. His grandfather's name looked up at him from the document. "Clayton Walker." "Daniel." His voice wavered. "Daniel, get in here." His son appeared from the bathroom, toothbrush hanging from his lips. "What happened?" "My grandfather. He's gone." Daniel's expression crumpled. "Man, Dad. I'm really sorry. Didn't realize you had extended family." "Neither did I." Jerome's words emerged barely audible. "Haven't laid eyes on him since I was 7 years old. My father ended contact with him when I was young. Can't even recall the reason." He studied the letter once more. "He left me land in North Carolina." "What type of land?" "Doesn't specify." The letter's vague. They remained awake into the late hours that evening. Jerome scrolling through his phone hunting for whatever details he could uncover. Ridgefield, North Carolina sat as a modest town roughly 3 hours northwest of Charlotte. Population hovering around 9,000. Nothing extraordinary distinguished it. He searched his grandfather's name and located an obituary. Clayton Walker, 89 years old, dedicated groundskeeper, preceded in death by his wife, survived by his grandson. Groundskeeper. The term activated something buried in Jerome's recollection. He'd been small, perhaps 6 or 7, positioned beside his father's chair while his father wept. "He picked that household over us. He picked them." Jerome had never grasped what those words signified. The following day, he contacted the law practice. The assistant was courteous but inflexible. They required a face-to-face meeting to address the specifics. Jerome explained his Memphis location, that he juggled 3 jobs, that abandoning everything wasn't feasible. The assistant placed him on hold, then returned with a compromise. They could facilitate a video conference, though eventually he'd need to travel to North Carolina for signing documents and examining the property. The video meeting occurred 3 days afterward. Jerome positioned himself in the apartment's single presentable spot. Daniel stayed just beyond camera range. Theodore Morrison materialized on his phone display, an elderly gentleman with pewter-colored hair and gentle features. "Mr. Walker," he opened. "My condolences regarding your grandfather. Clayton was truly an extraordinary individual. Honestly, I barely knew him, Jerome confessed. I'm aware there was a family separation. Morrison nodded. Clayton spoke about it with deep regret. He straightened his spectacles. What I'm preparing to share might surprise you. Your grandfather served for 53 years as the head groundskeeper for a rather distinguished person, an entertainer, to be precise. You may recognize the name Dolly Parton. Jerome's lungs seized. The Dolly Parton. Correct. Clayton started working for her in 1972 and continued in her employment until his retirement in 2025. He resided on her property in Ridgefield, an estate she acquired in the mid-70s as a personal sanctuary. When portions of her holdings were reorganized, the Ridgefield property was transferred to your grandfather in 2017 as part of his retirement arrangement. Jerome found himself speechless. Dolly Parton. Jolene. 9 to 5. Her voice had filled radios throughout his entire childhood. Morrison pressed forward. The property is considerable. The main structure is roughly 12,000 square feet positioned on 47 acres. It's remained unoccupied since your grandfather relocated to a care facility in 2023. I should be transparent with you, Mr. Walker. The property has sat neglected for 2 years. It will require extensive attention. The property taxes alone total roughly $11,000 each year, and they're currently overdue. Jerome's optimism collapsed like a deflating balloon. There's no way I can cover that. Which is precisely why, Morrison said with understanding, you might want to consider a sale. However, you should witness it firsthand. Explore it. Comprehend what you're receiving before reaching any conclusions. Your grandfather included specific instructions that you were to receive complete opportunity to retain the property if desired. Why me? What made him choose me after all these decades of silence? Morrison's demeanor grew tender. He composed a letter for you. I'm obligated to deliver it personally. Perhaps it contains answers. 2 weeks afterward, Jerome and Daniel occupied a rental vehicle navigating through countryside North Carolina. He'd requested time away from all 3 positions. Unpaid leave he couldn't reasonably manage. Yet something deep inside insisted this mattered. Daniel occupied the front passenger seat, observing the scenery transform from interstate to agricultural land to dense woodland of oak and hickory. Dad, what if this is fraudulent? He questioned for the 3rd occasion. I sat down with the attorney face to face. I examined the paperwork. It's legitimate. But what if the farmhouse is like crumbling? What if there's structural damage or the foundation's compromised? Then we'll liquidate it in current condition and apply whatever funds we receive toward outstanding bills. He shot him a look. But possibly, just possibly, this is our escape route. He refused to let optimism take root too deeply. Hope represented danger when you existed like they did. Hope exposed you to crushing letdown, and he'd experienced plenty of that for one lifetime. The navigation system directed them off the primary highway onto a 2-lane route, then onto a rural road, and ultimately onto an extended dirt path that appeared to vanish into the woodland endlessly. Tree limbs drooped low above, forming a passageway of foliage that transformed the afternoon sun into something amber and dreamlike. Private land, Daniel announced from a weathered placard. No entry. Trespassers face legal action. Jerome's grip tightened on the wheel. They traveled what seemed like several miles. Then the forest opened wide. Holy! Daniel breathed. The farmhouse emerged before them like something from a different century. It sprawled outward, constructed of weathered timber and fieldstone in an architectural blend of colonial ranch and mountain retreat. 2 stories high with additions spreading on both sides, encircling verandas, tall window frames, and a stately entrance with dual doors that had once commanded attention. Vines climbed the exterior walls. The grounds, which must have been pristine once, had surrendered to untamed grass and wildflowers. Multiple window panes showed cracks. The roofline dipped in sections. One of the veranda supports had fractured and was propped by what appeared to be a makeshift reinforcement. Yet even through its deterioration, it commanded awe. Jerome brought the car to a halt and simply absorbed the sight. This defied logic. This couldn't belong to him. People in his position didn't inherit farmhouses. They inherited financial strain and anxiety and bone weariness. "Dad," Daniel uttered softly. "This is absolutely crazy." They exited the vehicle gradually, almost ceremonially. The atmosphere carried scents of pine and soil and something more ancient, like decades themselves. Birdsong echoed from the tree line. The breeze stirred through wild shrubbery that must have once been precisely trimmed hedges. In the distance, Jerome spotted what resembled a storage shed or equipment barn, its crimson paint weathered to coral. He climbed the front steps cautiously. The planks protested under his weight, but supported him. The dual doors were secured with a substantial padlock that appeared recent. Morrison mentioned he'd hide the key, Jerome murmured, searching around the entrance frame. He discovered it concealed behind a warped shutter panel, a tan envelope holding a single bronze key and another letter. His hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. "Jerome, if you're reading this, then I've passed and you managed to find your way here. I apologize for my absence from your life. Your father had his justifications for separating us and I honored them despite the pain it caused. This farmhouse, this acreage, it contains more than you might comprehend. More than simply recollections. I devoted 53 years maintaining this property, serving the woman who owned it, and guarding confidences that aren't mine to share on paper. Move through these spaces. Notice details. Search carefully. Your grandfather who cherished you always, even from afar. Clayton." Jerome brushed moisture from his eyes. Daniel stood at his side, scanning the words over his shoulder. "He cherished you, Dad. I never really knew him. Maybe that's the point. You're here to understand him now." Jerome grasped the bronze key and inserted it into the padlock. It rotated effortlessly, the mechanism releasing with a definitive sound that carried across the veranda. He extracted the padlock and pressed forward. The door refused to move. He applied more force. Daniel contributed his strength. Eventually, with a protest of timber and oxidized hinges, the door yielded inward. Dust erupted into the atmosphere, illuminated by afternoon sunlight pouring through the entrance. The scent struck them instantly: aged lumber, decomposition, dampness, and beneath everything else, something different. Something that resembled fragrance or cologne from generations prior, absorbed into the structure like a spectre. Jerome entered first. The entryway stretched vast with a sweeping staircase ascending upward, dividing into two paths at a platform adorned with a stained glass panel. The panel portrayed a pastoral landscape, rolling hills, a stream, a descending sun. Even coated in filth, it captivated. The floor showed hardwood, distorted in sections from moisture intrusion. Furniture sat draped in ivory coverings, their silhouettes like dormant phantoms. To the left, through an archway, Jerome observed what appeared to be a sitting room. To the right, a ceremonial dining area with a table extensive enough to accommodate 20 guests. Everything existed suspended in time. A calendar mounted on the wall displayed July 1988. Correspondence rested in a stack on an accent table, envelopes yellowed from decades. A pair of reading spectacles lay atop a hardcover volume. It appeared as though someone had departed one afternoon and never circled back. "This feels like a time capsule," Daniel whispered, his words reverberating. Jerome ventured deeper into the farmhouse. The sitting room contained leather furnishings, a stone hearth substantial enough to walk into, and walls covered with shelving. Platinum records hung in displays. Photographs revealed a beaming Dolly Parton alongside various individuals, entertainers, dignitaries, regular people. In multiple photographs, Jerome recognized the same man positioned slightly aside, never at the focal point. A black man with compassionate eyes and a peaceful smile. His grandfather. "Dad, check this out." Daniel beckoned from beside the hearth. He indicated a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It displayed Dolly Parton seated in this exact room, acoustic guitar across her lap, and positioned behind her, hand resting on her shoulder, stood Clayton. Jerome lifted the frame, clearing dust from the surface. His grandfather appeared content, dignified, like he belonged precisely there. They investigated for hours, transitioning from space to space. A study with floor-to-ceiling bookcases, numerous shelves packed with leather-bound collector's editions. A rehearsal room with a concert grand piano, multiple guitars mounted on the walls, and audio equipment that appeared cutting-edge for its era. A kitchen that must have been spectacular once, featuring professional-grade appliances and a breakfast alcove that faced the rear gardens. Upstairs they discovered bedrooms. Countless bedrooms. The primary suite consumed an entire section with a canopy bed, a lounge space, and a washroom with a marble-soaking tub the dimensions of a small pool. Guest chambers each styled uniquely. Some with distinct themes. One featured ranch decor. Another displayed coastal styling. A third overflowed with athletic collectibles. At the corridor's terminus, they located a more compact room, plainer than the others. The bed was precisely arranged with a hand-stitched coverlet. On the bedside table rested a photograph, a young man cradling an infant. Jerome's breathing hitched. The man was his father. The infant was him. Grandfather's room. This was where Clayton had resided, in this unpretentious space while preserving this expansive farmhouse. Daniel discovered a chest at the bed's base. Within lay additional photographs, correspondence, press clippings about Dolly Parton's career, and a journal. Jerome opened it delicately, the pages fragile with time. March 15, 1992. He read aloud. Dolly returned from her tour today. She appeared exhausted. I prepared her favorite stew and she shared stories from the road. She inquired about my grandson again. I showed her the school portrait Marcus sent. She said he has remarkable eyes just like mine. It devastates me that Jerome doesn't know me. But Marcus made his decision and I must honor it. Even though it destroys me. Jerome's throat constricted. His father had never clarified why they'd severed connections with Clayton. He simply stated, certain matters should remain buried. Now Marcus was gone, too. Had passed 5 years earlier from illness, carrying his justifications to eternity. The sun descended by the time they completed investigating the main level and upstairs. They hadn't even approached the lower level or the separate structures yet. Jerome stood in the entryway, gazing upward at that stained glass panel now backlit by the fading light, projecting hues across the dusty floor. "What's going through your mind?" Daniel asked. "I'm thinking this defies logic. I'm thinking there's zero chance I can afford maintaining this property. The taxes by themselves would bankrupt us. The restoration would demand hundreds of thousands, possibly millions." He rotated in a gradual circle. "But I'm also thinking that my grandfather devoted most of his existence here, that he intended me to receive it, and I need to comprehend why before I surrender it." Daniel acknowledged. "So what's our move?" "We return. We invest time to genuinely examine this property. We determine what it's valued at, what it would require to liquidate it, and—" A noise resonated through the farmhouse. A groan, deep and prolonged, originating from somewhere beneath them. They both stiffened. "What was that?" Daniel whispered. "Old structure adjusting," Jerome said, attempting confidence, though his pulse accelerated. Another groan, then what resembled a door latching shut. "Dad, I don't think we're the only ones here." Jerome seized his phone, activating the flashlight. The sun had descended quicker than he'd noticed, and the farmhouse was accumulating shadows. "Let's move. We'll return tomorrow with adequate lighting." They proceeded toward the front entrance, advancing swiftly, but resisting the urge to sprint. Jerome's hand reached the door handle when he detected it. Footsteps. Measured, intentional, approaching from the corridor to their left. He wrenched the door outward. They spilled onto the veranda, inhaling the crisp evening atmosphere. Behind them, the farmhouse remained motionless and shadowed, preserving its mysteries for another occasion. "We're returning tomorrow," Jerome declared as much to himself as to Daniel. In full daylight with flashlights and possibly a tire iron, Daniel chuckled anxiously. You genuinely believe this property is worthwhile? Jerome gazed back at the farmhouse, at the timber walls that had housed his grandfather for over 50 years. Somewhere within existed explanations. And perhaps, just perhaps, the solution to transforming their circumstances. Yeah, he said quietly. I genuinely do. They arrived the following morning, equipped with industrial flashlights, a pry bar, and a resolve that outweighed apprehension. Jerome had scarcely rested. Each time he shut his eyes, he visualized that stained glass panel projecting hues across the dusty floor. Heard those phantom footsteps reverberating through the corridors. Daniel had investigated the farmhouse digitally until 2 in the morning, uncovering only fragments. A reference in a 1983 magazine feature about Dolly Parton's private sanctuaries. A grainy photograph from a 1997 estate catalogue. Speculation on entertainment forums about a concealed recording space somewhere in North Carolina. The morning sunlight rendered the farmhouse less ominous and more melancholy, like a forsaken chapel gradually being absorbed by wilderness. Jerome parked in the identical location as yesterday, and they remained seated momentarily, both summoning courage. You prepared? He asked. Daniel acknowledged, clutching his flashlight like a defense tool. Let's discover what grandfather wanted you to witness. Inside, daylight altered everything. What had appeared threatening in the dusk now presented itself as simply neglected. Dust particles pirouetted in the sunbeams penetrating through fractured windows. The sweeping staircase, though damaged, displayed artisanship that must have demanded a fortune. Every element conveyed prosperity and attention of an epoch when this property had been treasured. They proceeded methodically this time, chamber by chamber. The sitting room produced additional photographs, more perspectives into an existence Jerome could scarcely fathom. Dolly Parton with heads of state. Dolly Parton performing before multitudes. Dolly Parton in this exact room, casual and comfortable, playing dominoes with companions whose faces Jerome recognized from album artwork and film productions. And in numerous photographs, positioned at the periphery, was Clayton, delivering refreshments, arranging floral displays, standing discreetly near the entrance, never imposing, perpetually present. Daniel discovered a container of correspondence in the study, bound with twine and arranged chronologically. They positioned themselves on the floor, cautious with the delicate paper, and started examining. Most were professional exchanges, agreements, earnings reports, communications from music publishers and tour coordinators, but concealed between the formal paperwork were handwritten messages. One dated April 9, 1987, seized Jerome's attention. Clayton, I don't know how I'd manage without you. Everyone else demands something from me. You simply want me to be all right. Thank you for the stew, for the tranquility, for reminding me that home isn't a coordinate on a map. It's wherever you feel comprehended. You comprehend me better than most. Dolly. Another from December 24, 1993. Clayton, spending Christmas here rather than traveling was the finest choice I made all year. Watching you decorate this farmhouse. Hearing you whistle while you prepared meals, it reminded me why I acquired this property. Not for the seclusion or the serenity, but because you made it feel like it held significance. You make everything hold significance. Merry Christmas, my friend. Dolly. Jerome's hands quivered. These weren't communications from an employer to staff. These were exchanges between companions, between two individuals who had constructed something profound over decades of closeness and faith. Dad, examine this one, Daniel said, presenting a letter from 2011. Clayton, the physicians say I need to decelerate. Marcus contacted me yesterday. I didn't mention it because I knew it would distress you, but he finally connected after all these years. He inquired about you. I told him you think about Jerome every single day. I told him you preserve every school photograph he's ever mailed. He wept. I believe he regrets the separation, but pride is a formidable force. I'm arranging matters just in case time runs briefer than I anticipate. You've been devoted to me for 40 years. I want to ensure you're provided for. This farmhouse, This acreage, it should belong to you when I'm gone. You've merited it 1,000 times over. But more than that, you've merited tranquility. I hope you discover it here. With gratitude always, Dolly. Jerome pressed his palm to his mouth, tears coursing down his face. His father had been in communication with Dolly Parton. His father understood about Clayton's existence here, and still the separation had persisted. What manner of pride could divide so profoundly? They proceeded to the rehearsal room next. The concert grand piano wore a coating of dust, but when Daniel lifted the fallboard and struck a key, the tone resonated clear and authentic. The guitars mounted on the wall were vintage instruments, each valued at thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. A Gibson from 1958, a Martin from 1963. These weren't merely ornaments. These were implements of artistry, fragments of American music heritage. On a shelf adjacent to the recording equipment, Jerome located cassette tapes labeled in his grandfather's precise penmanship. December 1976, Christmas Gathering. July 1982, 4th of July Jam Session. April 1990, Late Night Session, just Dolly and her guitar. We should play these, Daniel suggested. Perhaps, Jerome responded, cautiously replacing them on the shelf. But not today. Today we need to continue searching. The dining area produced more treasures. Porcelain valued beyond his yearly earnings. Crystal that refracted light like imprisoned starlight. Silver service pieces oxidized black but still displaying the insignia of expert artisans. The table itself was solid oak, hand-carved, easily 12 feet in length. Jerome envisioned it surrounded by guests, with laughter and melodies and the kind of prosperity he'd only witnessed in cinema. They dedicated an hour in the kitchen cataloging everything. The appliances were decades outdated but premium quality for their era. The storage room remained filled with preserved foods long past expiration, their labels bleached but decipherable. His grandfather's work apron dangled on a peg beside the range. The material so threadbare it was nearly see-through in sections. Jerome grasped it carefully, drawing it to his face. It carried the scent of aged cloth and years, but beneath that he could sense something else. Cinnamon. His grandfather had carried the scent of cinnamon. A recollection emerged, vivid and unanticipated. He was 6 years old, perched on a kitchen counter somewhere, and a man with compassionate eyes was offering him a piece of candied ginger. Just a small taste, the man said. It's potent, but it's beneficial for you. Jerome had grimaced, and the man had chuckled. That chuckle, rich and resonant. Jerome inhaled sharply. He remembered. That was Clayton. Before the estrangement, before whatever transpired between his father and grandfather separated them, there had been this tenderness and cinnamon and laughter. Dad, you all right? Daniel contacted his arm. Yeah, he whispered, just recalling something I'd buried. By midday, they'd examined most of the first and second levels. They positioned themselves on the front veranda, consuming the sandwiches they'd prepared, observing the untamed grounds. Somewhere beyond stretched 47 acres of territory, woodland and clearings and potential. What do you estimate this is all valued at? Daniel asked. Jerome shook his head. I haven't the faintest notion. The platinum records alone could command hundreds of thousands. The instruments, the furnishings, the farmhouse itself. Even in this state, we're discussing millions probably. But none of it matters if we can't handle the taxes and maintenance. Unless we liquidate it all. Yeah, unless we liquidate it all. The notion unsettled his stomach. This represented his grandfather's existence. These walls had protected Clayton for over 50 years. Selling it felt like abandonment. They ventured back inside, resolved to complete the investigation. The lower level awaited, accessible through an entrance off the kitchen. The steps were sturdy but precipitous, descending into darkness that their flashlights only partially illuminated. The atmosphere grew more frigid with each step, and Jerome could detect water dripping somewhere in the expanse. The lower level was extensive, spanning beneath the entire foundation of the farmhouse. Sections of it had been completed, a wine repository with racks still containing bottles shrouded in dust, a storage zone with furnishings and containers stacked to the rafters, what appeared to have been a shelter or secured room from the Cold War period. But it was the study that drew their attention. They'd invested time there yesterday, but something about it troubled Jerome. They returned to it now in complete daylight, and he comprehended what had disturbed him. The chamber was perfectly square, but the bookcases didn't correspond to the dimensions. The wall of shelving on the east side was at least 2 feet more shallow than it should have been. "Daniel, come here." Jerome traced his fingers along the bookshelf, extracting volumes randomly. "Help me search for a mechanism or a trigger or something unusual." They proceeded methodically, inspecting every section of the integrated shelving. It was Daniel who located it, a leather-bound edition of Coat of Many Colors by Dolly Parton, an autobiography published from 1994. When he extracted it, rather than sliding outward, the entire volume tilted forward like a mechanism. Something engaged deep within the wall. A portion of the bookcase roughly 4 feet across pivoted inward with a whisper of maintained hinges. Jerome and Daniel locked eyes, expressions wide. Behind the bookcase stood a steel door, the variety you'd encounter on a bank vault. It was contemporary, completely inconsistent with the remainder of the farmhouse's character. A compact panel illuminated softly adjacent to it, green light pulsating like a heartbeat. "Is that what I think it is?" Daniel whispered. Jerome advanced cautiously. The panel featured a scanner, the variety utilized for fingerprints or palm prints. Above it, engraved in the steel, were words, "For Clayton and his." His heart pounded against his chest. This can't be legitimate. This resembles something from a thriller. "Attempt it," Daniel encouraged. "Contact the scanner. What if it's secured? What if authorities respond?" "Dad, the attorney provided you the key. You legally possess this property. You're not trespassing. You're investigating your own land." Jerome inhaled deeply and positioned his right hand on the scanner. The green light traversed across his palm and momentarily nothing occurred. Then the panel signaled 3 times and the substantial steel door released a pneumatic exhale. The mechanisms disengaged with a succession of substantial clicks. The door opened smoothly, exposing darkness beyond. Jerome directed his flashlight inside. The beam revealed a compact room perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet with metal shelving bordering 3 walls. On those shelves rested containers, portfolios, and stacks of what resembled documentation. They entered together. The atmosphere was distinctive here, a climate regulated and arid. Everything was arranged with fastidious attention. Jerome approached the nearest shelf and retrieved a tan folder labeled Property Deeds and Titles. Within were documents demonstrating ownership of multiple properties, the North Carolina estate, a condominium in Nashville, a coastal residence in South Carolina, a homestead in Kentucky, all in Clayton's name, transferred from Dolly Parton between 2010 and 2016. "Dear God," Jerome exhaled. "My grandfather possessed all of these." The subsequent folder contained insurance documentation. All of them settled completely. All designating Jerome as the recipient. Life insurance, property insurance, liability insurance. The aggregate value made him lightheaded. $750,000 across all policies. Daniel had discovered something else. A secure container. Compact and weighty. He transported it to Jerome. "Should I access it?" "Everything here belongs to us, evidently." "Yes, access it." Within the secure container were bundles of currency still wrapped in bank bands. $100 bills, stack after stack. Daniel tallied rapidly. "Dad, there's easily $50,000 here at minimum." Jerome's legs felt unsteady. Why would he maintain this much currency? Maybe he distrusted financial institutions. Maybe it represented emergency reserves. Daniel positioned the container down and advanced deeper into the vault. "Dad, there's additional material back here." Considerably more. At the rear of the compact vault stood another door. More modest but equally fortified. This vault held more than Maya had ever let herself dream of, but the money was only half the shock. It was proof that her grandmother had spent a lifetime quietly building power in a world that never expected it from someone like her, and then had chosen to hand that power to the granddaughter she'd never been allowed to know. The second vault. The inner door had an old combination lock with a spinning dial, the kind Maya had only ever seen in heist movies. Taped at eye level was an envelope with her name written in Lorraine's looping script. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open and unfolded a single slip of paper. On it, in neat blue ink, were 4 numbers, 33 to 17, 41 to 9. Underneath, her grandmother's message ran straight through her heart. These numbers are for you, Maya. Everything beyond this door is yours. I earned it honestly, and I give it freely. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. Let it free you the way it could never free me. I love you. I always did. Grandma Lorraine. Her vision swam. Marcus eased the paper from her hand and turned to the dial. 33 right, he murmured, spinning the wheel. 17 left. 41 right. 9 left. The mechanism clicked, clean and final. He pulled the handle, and the door swung inward. A hidden fortune. What lay beyond looked nothing like the neat rows of folders they'd just left. The second room was larger, maybe 20 feet on each side, its walls lined floor to ceiling with built-in safe deposit boxes, each with a tiny brass key already hanging from its lock. In the middle stood a single table, and on it, a leather-bound journal waited as though it had been expecting her. Maya stepped up to it slowly, afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. The first page bore the date January 5, 2017. Maya will never read this while I'm alive, Lorraine had written. My pride won't allow it, and Rita's anger won't permit it. But someday, when I'm gone, maybe she'll understand. Kenny gave me more than a job. He gave me security, respect, and eventually a fortune I never asked for but earned through 53 years of loyalty. These boxes contain that fortune. I've organized everything, documented everything. I want her to know that a woman like me, an immigrant's daughter with a 9th grade education, built something that matters, not through luck, but through dedication. This is my legacy. This is my apology. For all the years I couldn't be part of her life, this is my hope for her future. Maya could barely draw air. The words pinned her in place, heavier than any debt notice she'd ever opened. Beside her, Marcus read in silence, his breathing shallow and quick. We should open them, he whispered. She wanted you to. That's why she left the keys. Maya could only nod. She went to the first box, turned the small key, and swung the metal door open. Inside rested a single leather portfolio. She carried it to the table, unclasped it, and unfolded the contents. Bearer bonds, dozens of them, each for $10,000, issued over 3 decades. She counted with shaking hands. 200 bonds. $2 million in this one box alone. And somewhere, deeper in this room, waited even more, plus the diamonds worth $150 million that would upend everything she thought she knew about what a woman like her was allowed to hope for. I need to clarify something important before continuing with the rewrite. I notice the story is building toward revealing $265 million, which in your version should be the $150 million in diamonds, but I haven't reached that specific reveal yet in the paragraphs you've shared. Let me continue with the rewrite of what you've provided, and I'm ready to handle the diamond reveal when it comes. Daniel. His voice emerged choked. Daniel, look at this. His son moved closer, eyes expanding as he registered the bonds. Are these legitimate? They must be. They're in a vault. They're catalogued. There, he couldn't complete the thought. Container 2 held additional bonds. These from private enterprises, IBM, General Electric, Apple Computer from their founding era. Another $1 million minimum, potentially more, contingent on their present valuation. Container 3 contained stock certificates, the antiquated paper variety that corporations discontinued issuing in the early 2000s. Certificates for Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Amazon, all acquired decades prior when valuations were minimal. Jerome couldn't even begin calculating their present worth. Container for overflowed with gold coins, each in its individual protective casing. American eagles, Canadian maple leafs, South African krugerrands, hundreds of them, gleaming in the flashlight illumination. "Dad, I think we need to pause and contact someone," Daniel said, his voice unsteady. "This is excessive. This is like, we could get robbed or murdered if anyone discovered this." But Jerome couldn't halt. He proceeded to Container 5. Jewelry, not imitation jewelry, but pieces that belonged in collections. A diamond necklace with stones the dimensions of grapes, emerald earrings mounted in platinum, a ruby bracelet that resembled liquid flame. Each piece was wrapped in velvet and accompanied by authentication documentation. Container 6 contained additional stock certificates. These more contemporary, Tesla, Netflix, Google before it transformed into Alphabet. Clayton had continued investing until at least 2022. Container 7 held real estate documentation, not merely the properties Jerome had discovered in the first vault, but others. Commercial structures in Charlotte, residential properties in Nashville, undeveloped acreage in Tennessee and Virginia, parcels and parcels of earth, all generating revenue through rentals or appreciating in valuation. Jerome collapsed heavily onto the floor, his legs incapable of supporting him anymore. "I don't comprehend. How did he acquire all of this? Even working for Dolly Parton, even for 50 years, how?" Daniel had retrieved Clayton's journal again. He flipped through the pages, scanning rapidly. "Dad, listen to this. This is from January 2001. Dolly summoned me into her office today and said she was making me a partner, not in her music, but in her investments. She said I'd been managing her household finances for 29 years, and I'd saved her more money than any accountant ever had. She said she was giving me 10% of everything she earned from her real estate investments going forward. I told her it was excessive. She told me to be quiet and sign the documents. I signed. I wept. She embraced me and said, 'Clayton, you're the only person in my life who never requested anything. It's about time someone gave you everything.'" Jerome pressed his palms to his face. 10% of Dolly Parton's real estate investments compounded over 25 years. It was unfathomable. They accessed the remaining containers in a trance. Additional stocks, additional bonds, additional gold, additional jewelry, a collection of rare coins valued at hundreds of thousands independently. Documents demonstrating ownership stakes in various enterprises, intellectual property rights to compositions Clayton had apparently co-written, his contributions uncredited but now legally documented. By the time they reached the final container, number 32, Jerome felt like he was observing from outside his own body. This couldn't be real. Men like him, black single fathers juggling 3 jobs and praying the light stayed on, didn't stumble into fortunes. They inherited overdue notices, worn-out bodies, and if life was feeling generous, maybe a few $1,000s to soften the next blow. The last safe deposit box held a single envelope, sealed and marked in careful script, "Read this last." Jerome's fingers shook so violently that Daniel had to open it for him. Inside was one sheet of paper, dated October 1st, 2025, just 2 days before Clayton died. "My dearest Jerome," it began. "If you're reading this, you've opened all the boxes. You've seen what I built from spare change, opportunity, and one woman's generosity. The total value is approximately $150 million in diamonds and other assets. Yes, you read that correctly. $150 million. I know it feels impossible. I know you're frightened and overwhelmed, but hear me clearly, every dollar is legitimate. Every investment is recorded. Every stone has a documented history. Dolly's legal team helped me structure everything properly. The taxes are current. The books are clean. This is yours. Free and clear. But money is not why I'm writing. I'm writing to tell you that I stayed on this land for 53 years not because I was trapped, but because I chose to. Dolly gave me family when mine split apart. She gave me purpose when I felt like a useless old handyman. She gave me respect when the world saw me as just the help. I earned this fortune, but I earned something even more valuable, dignity. I pray you use this wealth to claim your own dignity, to stop breaking your body for scraps, to give Daniel chances I could never give your father, to step out from the kind of poverty that steals dreams and grinds souls into dust. More than that, I pray you remember where it came from. It came from loyalty. From showing up every day. From doing the quiet work that lets other people shine. From being excellent at a job the world thinks is beneath excellence. You are my grandson. My blood runs in you. I know that same excellence lives inside you. Use this fortune to build something that matters. Don't squander it. Don't bury it. Don't let it turn you into someone you're not. Let it make you more of who you already are. I love you, Jerome. I always loved you. I'm sorry I couldn't say this face to face, but maybe this way you'll believe me. Your grandfather, Clayton Walker. Jerome folded in on himself, dropping to the cold concrete as a sob tore out of his chest. Daniel dropped beside him, wrapping his arms around his father, both of them shaking, both of them weeping, for the years lost, for the love they hadn't known they had, and for the impossible weight of the future that had just landed at their feet. They stayed like that for a long time, clinging to each other in a vault overflowing with wealth they could not truly grasp, mourning a man they'd barely known but who had loved them with a stubborn, unspoken ferocity. When Jerome could finally drag air into his lungs again, he turned to his son, eyes red and disbelieving. What do we do, Daniel? What in the world do we do now? I don't know, Dad, Daniel whispered. I really don't know. Silence settled over the room, dense and heavy. The number, $150 million in diamonds and everything else, hung in Jerome's mind like something from another universe. It was so far beyond his experience it didn't feel like a blessing or a curse. It felt unreal, like a clerical error in the universe that someone, sooner or later, would correct. We need to contact that attorney, Jerome finally said. Morrison. We need to inform him about what we discovered. What if he tries to confiscate it? What if he claims we can't possess it? Then we'll resist. But grandfather stated it was documented. He said it was legitimate. We need professionals to guide us through this. Jerome rose gradually, his legs still unsteady. But first, we need to photograph everything. Record every single item in these containers. And we need to secure this property tighter than a Federal Reserve. They dedicated the next 3 hours systematically photographing every bond, every stock certificate, every piece of jewelry. Daniel constructed a spreadsheet on his phone, inventorying everything they uncovered. By the time they completed the task, the sun was descending again, bathing the study in shades of amber and copper. Jerome secured the inner vault, then the outer one. They repositioned the bookcase back into alignment, and the concealed entrance vanished flawlessly into the wall. To anyone unaware of its existence, the study appeared like just another chamber in an aging farmhouse. They traveled back to their motel in silence, both too devastated to converse. In his jacket pocket, Jerome carried duplicates of the most critical documents, including Clayton's final letter. The paper felt like it weighed a ton. That night, Jerome lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Daniel slept in the adjacent bed. His mind cycled through impossible arithmetic. With $150 million in diamonds and assets, he could eliminate every obligation he carried. He could purchase a house, a genuine house with a lawn and separate bedrooms for both of them. He could send Daniel to any university on the planet. He could resign from all 3 positions. He could breathe. But beneath the elation lurked dread. This magnitude of wealth arrived with accountability, with peril, with a target painted on his back. People murdered for considerably less. The wrong individual discovering this could obliterate them. He contemplated his grandfather preserving this secret for years, existing modestly in his simple room while positioned atop a fortune. Had Clayton been frightened? Had he been isolated? Had the burden of it crushed his spirit even while it furnished security? Jerome reached for his phone and accessed the photos they'd captured. He scrolled through images of bearer bonds and stock certificates and jewelry that sparkled like imprisoned starlight. Then he paused on the photograph of Clayton's final letter. He examined it again, concentrating on one sentence: "Let it make you more of who you already are." Who was he? He was a father who exhausted himself to provide for his son. He was a man who'd been knocked down by existence repeatedly but kept rising. He was someone who comprehended struggle, who understood what it felt like to choose between medication and nourishment, who'd mastered stretching $1 until it protested. This wealth couldn't eliminate that person. It shouldn't. Those experiences had forged him resilient, had instructed him on the value of things, had granted him compassion for everyone else grinding through existence on the brink of collapse. He positioned the phone down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would contact Morrison. Tomorrow he would initiate the process of claiming this inheritance properly, legally, securely. Tomorrow he would commence the impossible assignment of learning how to possess wealth. But tonight he remained Jerome Walker, black single father, triple shift worker, man who'd paid $75 for a rental vehicle and considered it extravagant. Tonight he remained himself, and somehow that felt like the most valuable possession he owned. The phone call to Theodore Morrison occurred at 7 in the morning, 3 days following the vault discovery. Jerome had scarcely slept in 72 hours. Each time he shut his eyes, he witnessed those bearer bonds, those stock certificates, those diamonds. That figure, $150 million. It cycled endlessly in his consciousness like a melody he couldn't silence. "Mr. Morrison," he said when the attorney answered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "It's Jerome Walker. I need to meet with you today. It's urgent." There was a hesitation. "Is everything satisfactory with the property?" "The property is fine. It's what's contained within the property that we need to address in person. Privately." Another pause, extended this time. "I can arrange my afternoon. 2 o'clock. I'll be there." Jerome and Daniel made the journey to Charlotte in near silence. They departed the motel that morning, paid cash, and informed no one of their destination. Paranoia had established itself rapidly. Jerome kept monitoring the rearview mirror for vehicles that might be trailing them. Daniel had deactivated location services on both their phones. They'd consumed enough true crime programs to understand that this magnitude of wealth transformed them into targets. Morrison's office occupied a historic structure downtown, all granite and aged mahogany and the variety of silence that affluence purchased. The assistant escorted them to a conference room with a panorama of the city skyline. Morrison entered moments afterward, securing the door behind him. "Mr. Walker, Daniel." He clasped their hands, his grip solid but his eyes inquisitive. "You sounded troubled on the phone. What's transpired?" Jerome extracted a folder from his bag and slid it across the burnished table. Within were duplicates of everything they'd uncovered, photographs of the bonds, the stocks, the jewelry, the property documentation. He'd printed Clayton's final letter and positioned it at the rear. Morrison opened the folder. His expression remained composed as he examined the initial few pages. Then his eyebrows elevated. Then his mouth parted slightly. By the time he reached the letter, his hands were trembling. "Dear God," he whispered. "I had no comprehension. Clayton never disclosed any of this to me. So it's legitimate." Jerome's voice fractured. "It's legal." Morrison glanced up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, Jerome witnessed authentic emotion on his face. "If these documents are genuine, and I have no basis to suspect they're not, then yes, it's extraordinarily real, and yes, it's legal. Dolly Parton's estate matters were resolved years ago. These assets were already separated, already transferred to Clayton during her lifetime. They're not components of her estate. They're components of his, which means they're now components of yours." Jerome's vision blurred. He gripped the table's edge. $150 million in diamonds and assets. At minimum, Morrison said quietly. Several of these stocks have split multiple times since acquisition. The real estate has appreciated substantially. The diamonds and jewelry alone could command tens of millions depending on quality and provenance. He closed the folder carefully. Mr. Walker, you're not simply wealthy, you're among the wealthiest individuals I've ever represented. You're among the wealthiest men in North Carolina. The room tilted. Jerome felt Daniel's hand on his shoulder, anchoring him. What do I do? He whispered. How do I even begin managing something like this? Morrison stood and walked to the window, hands folded behind his back. First, we need to authenticate everything, every bond, every certificate, every deed, every diamond. We'll need to engage specialists, gemologists, appraisers, accountants, tax attorneys. This will require months to fully inventory and evaluate. Second, he turned back to face him, we need to maintain confidentiality. The instant news spreads, you'll be overwhelmed with people demanding a portion of it, family members you've never encountered, investment advisors promising guaranteed profits, charitable organizations with persuasive missions, not to mention criminals who might perceive you as prey. Jerome's stomach plummeted. Are we in jeopardy? Not presently, but wealth of this scale necessitates protection, personal protection, digital protection, legal protection. He returned to his seat. I need to pose a question, Mr. Walker. Are you equipped for what follows? Because once we initiate this process, your existence will never be identical. Everything transforms. Everything. Jerome studied Daniel, who returned his gaze with eyes containing terror and optimism in equal proportions. He contemplated their apartment in Memphis, about his 3 jobs, about the power bill and the rent warning and the relentless grinding weariness of poverty. He contemplated Clayton dedicating 53 years on that farmhouse, constructing this fortune quietly, anticipating the day it could liberate someone. I'm equipped, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Inform me what we need to accomplish. The subsequent 2 weeks became a blur of conferences, document examinations, and escalating anxiety. Morrison assembled a team, a forensic accountant named Patricia Lang who authenticated every financial instrument, an estate attorney named Gerald Moss who validated the legal transfer of assets, and a private security consultant named Robert Hayes who made Jerome feel simultaneously protected and more suspicious. They operated in secrecy, convening in Morrison's office after business hours, corresponding through encrypted messages. The bonds were authentic. The stocks were legitimate. The jewelry was genuine. The diamonds were certified. Every single item in those vault containers was precisely what it appeared to be. The total valuation, after comprehensive assessment and accounting for appreciation, reached $287 million. $287 million. Jerome stopped being capable of comprehending the figure. It was too immense, too theoretical. He attempted to deconstruct it into terms he could grasp. It was sufficient to purchase his apartment complex 95 times over. It was sufficient to fund Daniel's college tuition for 3,000 students. It represented more wealth than everyone he'd ever known combined would accumulate in their entire lifetimes. Patricia Lang, the accountant, presented him with spreadsheets and projections. Even if you never access the principal, she explained, conservative investments will produce approximately $8 million annually in passive revenue. That's roughly $667,000 per month. $22,000 per day. You could expend $1,000 every hour of every day for the remainder of your existence and still perish wealthier than you are presently. Jerome had to exit the chamber. He stood in the corridor of Morrison's office building, leaning against the wall, inhaling deeply. Daniel located him there. Dad, you all right? I don't know how to be this individual, he said. I don't know how to be someone with $287 million. I still hesitate when I purchase name-brand bread instead of store-brand. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said something that startled him. Maybe you don't have to transform into someone different. Maybe you just get to be yourself, but without being terrified constantly. He studied his son, this 15-year-old who'd matured too rapidly, who'd learned to stress about finances before he'd learned to drive. When did you become so insightful? I had a solid teacher. They were still preserving everything confidential, still residing in their Memphis apartment, still sustaining the facade of ordinary existence. Jerome had contacted all 3 jobs, claiming illness. He understood he'd have to resign eventually, but the notion petrified him. Those jobs, miserable as they were, represented his identity. Without them, who was he? The confidentiality lasted precisely 16 days. Jerome was at the supermarket purchasing the same generic brands he always purchased out of habit when his phone rang. Unknown number. He nearly ignored it, but something prompted him to answer. "Is this Jerome Walker?" A woman's voice. Professional but slightly hurried. "Who's inquiring?" "My name is Jennifer Holt. I'm a reporter with the Charlotte Observer. I'd like to pose a few questions about the estate you inherited from Clayton Walker and its connection to Dolly Parton." Jerome's blood turned frigid. "I have no statement. Mr. Walker, we're publishing a story tomorrow about a substantial inheritance linked to Dolly Parton's estate. We've verified through public records that you're the exclusive heir to Clayton Walker's assets. We'd like to provide you an opportunity to share your perspective before we publish." "How did you discover this?" "Property records are public, Mr. Walker. Your grandfather's will was filed with the probate court. Once we commenced investigating, the connections became apparent. We've been developing this story for a week." Jerome disconnected. His hands were trembling so severely he could barely dial Morrison's number. He answered on the first ring. "It's exposed," he said. "The media knows." "How much do they know?" "They know about the estate. They know about my grandfather working for Dolly. They're publishing a story tomorrow." Morrison cursed, something Jerome had never heard him do. "Get to my office immediately and don't communicate with anyone. No reporters, no neighbors, no one." The article appeared on the internet that night before the print edition even released. The headline proclaimed, "Mystery heir inherits country legend's hidden estate. Dolly Parton's groundskeeper's grandson receives farmhouse and unknown fortune." The story was predominantly speculation. They didn't know about the vault or the authentic value of the inheritance, but they knew sufficient. Within hours, Jerome's phone was inundated with calls and texts from numbers he didn't recognize. His social media accounts, which he scarcely used, detonated with friend requests and messages. Reporters materialized at his apartment building, establishing camp in the parking lot. Then arrived the threats. The first was an email from someone claiming to be Dolly Parton's second cousin. "That wealth rightfully belongs to Dolly's family. Your grandfather stole from her for years. We'll see you in court." Another came through Facebook Messenger. "You don't deserve this. You didn't work for it. People like you are why this country is falling apart." A voicemail, slurred and hostile, "You better watch your back. Money like that gets people murdered." Robert Hayes, the security consultant, relocated Jerome and Daniel to a hotel under assumed names. He installed security systems at their apartment and arranged for someone to monitor it around the clock. He explained calmly but firmly that they were now targets for everything from lawsuits to kidnapping. "This is temporary," he said. "Once things stabilize, once you determine where you want to reside permanently, we'll establish proper security protocols. But presently, you need to remain concealed." Jerome sat in the anonymous hotel room watching news coverage of his own existence on television. They displayed photos of the farmhouse in Ridgefield, aerial footage from a drone. They interviewed people from the town who remembered Clayton. "He was so quiet," one woman said. "Never created any commotion about anything. Who knew he was positioned on a fortune?" They located photos of Jerome from his high school yearbook, from his social media accounts. They discussed him working 3 jobs, struggling as a single father. Some commentators called his story inspiring. Others suggested he was undeserving, that the wealth should transfer to Dolly Parton's surviving family members or to charity. Daniel watched with him, his face ashen. "Dad, I'm frightened." He pulled him close. "Me too, son. Me too." The lawsuit initiated on day 3. Dolly Parton's adult children from previous relationships filed a claim, arguing that their mother had been unduly influenced by Clayton and that the transfer of assets constituted theft. The claim was groundless. Morrison proved that with documentation showing everything had been executed legally and transparently, but it froze assets and generated headlines. A man claiming to be Clayton's nephew from his first marriage emerged demanding his portion of family wealth. Another woman, supposedly a distant cousin, filed paperwork claiming Jerome wasn't actually Clayton's grandson and demanding a DNA test. The scrutiny was suffocating. Every financial transaction Jerome had ever conducted suddenly became relevant. Old credit card debt from his 20s became a new story. Mystery heir has history of financial problems. The fact that he'd once filed for bankruptcy after his father's illness was transformed into evidence of poor judgment. People he hadn't communicated with in years emerged from obscurity. His father's old friends, distant relatives he'd encountered once at a funeral, former neighbors, all of them suddenly remembered their close relationship with Jerome and Clayton. All of them had their hands extended. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the story broke. Jerome appeared on a local news segment, not one of the sensationalist programs that had been hounding him, but a thoughtful interview with a Charlotte journalist known for humanizing complex stories. He spoke about Clayton, about discovering the vault, about the weight of sudden wealth. But mostly, he talked about his plans, establishing a scholarship fund for children of service workers, creating a foundation to support single parents, preserving the farmhouse as a historical site honoring his grandfather's legacy and Dolly Parton's generosity. Stories like his matter, he said simply. Stories like mine matter. The interview changed everything. The tone of the coverage shifted. Instead of mystery heir, he became working father who inherited responsibility. The frivolous lawsuit started collapsing as public opinion turned against the opportunists. Dolly Parton's children, facing backlash for their legal challenge, quietly withdrew their claim and issued a statement supporting Jerome's plans for the historical preservation. But the pressure didn't vanish. It just transformed. Now Jerome faced a different variety of scrutiny, the judgment of people who thought they knew better than him what to do with the wealth. Financial advisors cold-called him with investment schemes. Non-profit organizations sent heartbreaking letters about children and causes and desperate needs. Friends and acquaintances he'd lost contact with years ago suddenly resurfaced, all of them with problems that money could resolve. Daniel changed too, at first subtly, then more obviously. He started researching expensive colleges, discussing opportunities that had always been impossibly beyond reach. He asked if they could relocate to a better neighborhood, if he could get a car, if they could take a genuine vacation. One night, 3 weeks after the news interview aired, Jerome discovered him browsing luxury sneakers on his phone. "Daniel, what are you doing?" He glanced up, defensive. "Just looking. We can afford it now, right? We can afford anything. Come here." He sat on the couch, patting the space beside him. Daniel joined him reluctantly. "Son, listen to me. Yes, we have wealth now. More wealth than we can expend in 10 lifetimes. But that doesn't mean we should become different people. Why not? Why shouldn't we enjoy it? You've worked yourself to exhaustion my whole life. Don't you want to stop struggling?" "I do want to stop struggling, but I don't want to become someone who forgets what struggle feels like. Your grandfather had this wealth for years, Daniel. Years. And he lived in a modest room in that farmhouse and drove a 20-year-old truck and shopped at thrift stores. You know why?" Daniel shook his head. "Because the wealth wasn't the point. The dignity was. He didn't let wealth define him. He defined wealth by how he earned it and what he accomplished with it. That's what I want for us. I want us to be secure, to be comfortable, to have opportunities, but I don't want us to become people who measure worth in dollars." Daniel was quiet for an extended moment. Then he said, "I just want you to be happy, Dad. You've been exhausted my whole life. Even when you pretended not to be. You deserve to be happy." Jerome's throat constricted. "I'm getting there, son. I'm getting there." He was working with Morrison's team to establish the foundation, to set up trusts that would protect their assets, to create structures that would ensure the wealth accomplished meaningful work long after he was gone. Patricia Lang had created a financial plan that was both conservative and generous, enough to live comfortably without excess, enough to give meaningfully without depleting resources, enough to invest wisely without chasing returns. Jerome purchased a house, not a mansion, just a standard house in a solid neighborhood with a yard and a driveway and sufficient space for both of them. It cost $350,000 and he paid cash. The real estate agent kept attempting to show him properties in the millions, but Jerome knew what he wanted. He wanted a home, not a declaration. He resigned from his jobs. That was the most difficult part. Departing from the warehouse, from the office maintenance service, from the breakfast spot felt like leaping off a precipice without knowing if there was ground below. Those jobs had been his identity for so long. But on his final day at the warehouse, Rick, the supervisor who'd always treated him like he was expendable, shook his hand and said, "You're making a mistake abandoning steady work. That wealth won't last forever." Jerome had smiled. "You're correct. Wealth doesn't last forever, but dignity does." He enrolled Daniel in a private school for the next year, not because the public school wasn't adequate, but because his son had earned the opportunity to learn in smaller classes with more resources. He established a trust fund that would cover his college, his graduate school if he pursued it, even his first house someday. But he also ensured Daniel understood he would still work summer jobs, still learn the value of earning his own money, still comprehend that privilege came with responsibility. The historical preservation project consumed his attention. He collaborated with historians and archivists to preserve Dolly Parton memorabilia, with architects to restore the farmhouse without eliminating its character, with designers to create exhibits that told the complete story, not just of a music legend, but of the man who'd stood beside her for over 5 decades. He discovered more letters as they inventoried the farmhouse's contents. Letters between Dolly and Clayton that revealed the depth of their friendship, the respect she'd had for his judgment, the way he'd become the one person in her life who wanted nothing from her except her well-being. One letter dated May 7, 2013 made Jerome understand everything. Dolly had written, "Clayton, I've been thinking about legacy. Not the music that'll outlive me whether I want it to or not, but the real legacy, the kind that changes individual lives. You've changed mine. You've shown me that loyalty isn't purchased, it's earned, that respect flows both ways regardless of job titles, that the people who work hardest are often the ones the world values least. I want your grandson to know this. Someday when I'm gone and you're gone, I want him to inherit this farmhouse and know that his grandfather was one of the finest people I ever knew. I want him to understand that success isn't about fame or fortune. It's about being excellent at whatever you do, whether that's writing songs or maintaining a property. Your excellence has inspired me for 41 years. I hope it inspires him too." Jerome sat in the study where he'd found the hidden vault and wept. He finally understood. Dolly hadn't left this fortune to Clayton out of guilt or obligation. She'd done it out of genuine respect, out of a friendship that had lasted longer than most marriages, out of a belief that the people who did the invisible work deserved to be seen. And Clayton hadn't hoarded that fortune. He'd invested it, grown it, and carefully preserved it for someone who would understand its true value. Not the dollars, but the dignity behind them. Jerome was beginning to comprehend that he wasn't just inheriting wealth. He was inheriting a responsibility to honor what that wealth represented. Every stock certificate was a reminder that loyalty matters. Every property deed was proof that doing excellent work, even work the world overlooks, has value. Every bearer bond was a testament to the truth that you don't have to be famous to be important. He stood in front of the farmhouse one evening, watching the sunset paint the timber walls amber. Construction crews were starting work next week, beginning the restoration that would transform this forgotten estate into a place of learning and remembrance. The Heritage Center would open in 2 years, maybe 3. It would tell Dolly Parton's story, but it would also tell Clayton's. And maybe in some small way it would change how people thought about the invisible workers who made the world function. Daniel joined him on the lawn. "You think grandfather would be proud?" Jerome smiled. "I think he'd tell me I'm overthinking it and to get back to work." "Sounds like you." "Yeah," Jerome said softly. "I guess it does." They stood together as night descended over the North Carolina hills. Two people who'd been broken, frightened and exhausted, now standing on land they owned, looking at a future they could actually plan for. The wealth hadn't made them different people. It had just made them the people they'd always had the potential to be if poverty hadn't been standing in the way. And that, Jerome realized, was the real inheritance, not the dollars in the vault, but the permission to become who you were meant to be all along. Building something that matters. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once. 6 months after the inheritance became public, Jerome stood in the grand entryway of the farmhouse and barely recognized himself. Not because he looked different, he still wore jeans and work boots, still kept his hair trimmed short and practical, still preferred functional over fashionable. But the weight he'd carried for 15 years, the exhaustion that had lived in his bones like a permanent condition, had finally lifted. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building. The Dolly Parton Heritage Foundation launched on a cold January morning with a press conference held right here in this entryway. Local media came. National outlets sent correspondents. And to Jerome's surprise, several of Dolly Parton's family members attended to show their support. Her niece from her brother's side, a woman named Carol who was in her late 50s, approached Jerome before the cameras started rolling. "I want to apologize," Carol said quietly. "For the lawsuit, for doubting you. My aunt talked about Clayton all the time. She called him her anchor, said he kept her grounded when fame tried to pull her away from what mattered. If she wanted him to have this, then you should have it too." Jerome shook her hand, blinking back tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know. What you're doing here," Carol gestured around the entryway, "turning this place into something that helps people. Aunt Dolly would have loved it. She always said music was about connection, about making people feel less alone. You're continuing that in a different way." The foundation's mission statement was simple but comprehensive: to provide opportunity and dignity to working families through education, housing assistance, and financial literacy programs. Jerome had worked with non-profit consultants for months to structure it properly, to ensure that wealth would be used efficiently and ethically. He'd established an endowment of $75 million, enough to fund operations in perpetuity while still leaving him personally wealthy beyond measure. The first initiative was the Single Parent Scholarship Fund. Jerome remembered too well what it felt like to watch opportunities slip away because there was no money for tuition, for books, for the time away from work that education required. The fund would provide full scholarships to single parents pursuing vocational training, associate degrees, or bachelor's degrees, along with stipends for childcare and living expenses. "Education changed my son's trajectory," Jerome told the assembled reporters during the press conference. "But I almost couldn't afford to keep him in school. We came so close to him dropping out so many times, not because he wasn't capable, but because we were broke. No parent should have to choose between their child's education and keeping the lights on. No one should have to sacrifice their own education because they're trying to feed their family." Within 3 weeks of the fund's announcement, they received over 8,000 applications. Jerome sat in the farmhouse's study, now converted into the foundation's headquarters, reading story after story that could have been his own. Single mothers working night shifts. Single fathers juggling 3 jobs. Parents who'd put their dreams on hold for years, sometimes decades, to ensure their children survived. The selection committee, which Jerome chaired, chose the first 200 recipients. They represented every state, every background, every type of struggle. A 38-year-old woman in Tennessee who'd been cleaning offices for 15 years and wanted to become a dental hygienist. A 42-year-old man in Virginia who'd been working construction since he was 16 and dreamed of becoming an architect. A 29-year-old mother of 3 in South Carolina who wanted to finish the nursing degree she'd abandoned when her husband left. Jerome called each recipient personally. Those phone calls became the best part of his week. "Hello, is this Jennifer?" "Yes." "Who's this?" "My name is Jerome Walker. I'm calling from the Dolly Parton Heritage Foundation. I'm pleased to tell you that you've been selected to receive a full scholarship." Silence, then sobbing. Every single time, sobbing. "Are you serious?" This is real. It's real. We're going to cover your tuition, your books, your childcare, and we're providing a monthly stipend for living expenses. You're going to get your degree, Jennifer. You're going to build the life you've been working toward. More sobbing. I don't know what to say. Thank you, God. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. Just promise me you'll remember how this feels. And someday when you're able, you'll help someone else who's where you are now. I promise. I swear. I promise. Those calls sustained Jerome through the difficult parts of the transformation. Because rebuilding the farmhouse was harder than he'd anticipated, both physically and emotionally. Every room held memories of his grandfather, echoes of a life Jerome had never known. The restoration team found Clayton's fingerprints in unexpected places, notes tucked behind baseboards, measurements penciled onto closet walls, small repairs made with evident care. In the kitchen, behind a loose tile, they found a photograph of Jerome as a toddler, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. On the back in Clayton's handwriting, "My grandson, Jerome Matthew Walker, age 2. I love him more than he'll ever know." Jerome had to leave the farmhouse that day. He drove aimlessly through the North Carolina countryside, crying so hard he had to pull over twice. The loss of what could have been a relationship with this man who'd loved him from a distance felt overwhelming. All those years wasted because of pride, because of whatever had broken between his father and grandfather. All those years Clayton had spent in this farmhouse, looking at this photo, loving a child he couldn't reach. But the grief fueled his purpose. Every scholarship he awarded, every family he helped felt like honoring Clayton's memory, like telling his grandfather, "I understand now. I understand that love isn't always present. Sometimes it's a fortune hidden in a vault, waiting for the moment it can change everything." The Heritage Center portion of the farmhouse opened in phases. The rehearsal room became an interactive exhibit where visitors could try instruments, record themselves singing Dolly Parton songs, and learn about the craft of songwriting. The formal sitting room became a gallery showcasing her awards, her costumes, and memorabilia from her 60-year career. But Jerome insisted on something unconventional, an entire wing dedicated to the people behind the scenes. The Invisible Workforce exhibit featured photographs and stories of groundskeepers, assistants, roadies, sound technicians, backup singers, and all the other people whose names never appeared on album covers but whose work made the music possible. Clayton's story was there, told honestly and completely, but so were dozens of others. Daniel suggested they include interactive elements. Make people actually do the work, he said. Let them try to maintain a 12,000 square foot farmhouse in a day. Let them manage a tour schedule. Let them see how hard this stuff is. The idea evolved into the Experience Center, where visitors could spend time in realistic simulations of various behind-the-scenes jobs. It became the most popular part of the Heritage Center. People left with new appreciation for work they'd always taken for granted. The music education program launched that spring. Jerome partnered with schools in low-income areas across North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia, providing instruments, instruction, and performance opportunities for students who otherwise would never have access to music education. They called it the Clayton Walker Arts Initiative. My grandfather believed in excellence, Jerome explained at the launch event. He believed that whatever you do, you should do it with pride and skill. Music teaches that, it teaches discipline, creativity, collaboration, but most importantly, it teaches you that you have something valuable to contribute to the world. One girl, maybe 12 years old, raised her hand. "Mr. Walker, is it true you used to be poor?" Jerome smiled. "Yes, very poor. There were times we ate instant noodles for every meal because it was all we could afford. But now you're rich." "Now I have wealth, yes. But rich is something different. Rich is about more than your bank account. It's about purpose, about relationships, about knowing you matter." "Did you feel rich when you were poor?" Jerome considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, when my son brought home a good report card, I felt rich. When we laughed together even though things were hard, I felt rich. Wealth made my life easier, but it didn't make me valuable. I was always valuable. I just didn't know it yet. Daniel had changed in ways both expected and surprising. He'd enrolled in the private school Jerome chose, but he'd also insisted on getting a part-time job at a local bookstore. I need to earn some of my own money, he explained when Jerome questioned why. Not because we need it, but because I need to. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. He'd grown serious about music, taking guitar lessons twice a week and spending hours in the farmhouse's rehearsal room practicing. Jerome would find him there late at night, working through chord progressions, writing lyrics in a worn notebook. You know what's weird, he said to Jerome one evening. People treat me differently now. At school, everyone wants to be my friend, but I know it's because of the money. They don't actually care about me. They care about what I can give them. Jerome sat beside him on the piano bench. That's one of the hardest parts of wealth, figuring out who's real and who isn't. How do you do it? How do you trust anyone? You trust slowly. You watch how people act when they think no one's watching. You notice who asks about you and who only asks about what you have. And you give people chances to prove themselves, but you also protect yourself. He put his arm around him. It's lonely sometimes, but not as lonely as pretending people love you when they only love your money. Daniel nodded slowly. Is that why you still shop at the same grocery store? Why you still drive your old car? Why you won't buy designer stuff? Partly, but also because I don't want to become someone I don't recognize. The wealth should serve my values, not replace them. Good, Daniel said. Because I like who you are. Don't change, okay? I'll try not to. You hold me accountable. The town of Ridgefield transformed around the farmhouse's restoration. The Heritage Center attracted tourists, which meant the town needed hotels, restaurants, shops. Local entrepreneurs opened businesses, a bed and breakfast called the Mountain Laurel Inn, a diner that served Dolly Parton's favorite foods, a music store that gave lessons and sold instruments. The economic impact rippled outward. Construction jobs during the restoration became permanent maintenance positions. The Heritage Center needed staff, descents, gift shop workers, archivists, event coordinators. The foundation's headquarters employed accountants, program managers, outreach specialists. Within 2 years, the unemployment rate in Ridgefield dropped by 40%. But Jerome's favorite change was smallest and most personal. A woman named Beth approached him during one of his many site visits. Beth was in her 50s, dressed in a housekeeper's uniform from one of the new hotels. Mr. Walker, I don't mean to bother you, but I wanted to say thank you. For what? For the exhibit, the one about invisible workers. Beth's eyes filled with tears. I've been cleaning hotels for 27 years. My whole life, people look through me like I'm not even there. But in your Heritage Center, there's a whole section about how housekeeping is an art, about how we're craftspeople, about how our work matters. My daughter came through on a school trip. She saw it and for the first time ever, she told me she was proud of me. Jerome embraced this stranger, both of them crying. Your work does matter. It always did. I'm just making sure people know it. My daughter's applying for one of your scholarships. She wants to be a teacher. Because of you, she might actually get to. What's her name? Olivia. Olivia Sanders. Jerome made a note in his phone. Later that week, he personally reviewed Olivia's application. The girl was brilliant, dedicated, and had written about her mother with such pride it made Jerome's heart ache. Olivia became one of the scholarship recipients. At the award ceremony, Jerome made sure Beth was in the front row. The foundation expanded beyond Jerome's original vision. They added a housing initiative that helped families purchase their first homes through low-interest loans and down payment assistance. They created a financial literacy program that taught budgeting, investing, and wealth building to people who'd never had enough money to manage. They established a microloan program for small businesses, focusing on entrepreneurs from underserved communities. Every initiative carried Clayton's fingerprints, practical, dignified, focused on creating opportunity rather than dependency. Jerome met with his board of directors monthly. He'd assembled a diverse group: educators, social workers, business leaders, and most importantly, people who'd experienced poverty firsthand. They challenged him, pushed him to think bigger, and kept him grounded when the scope of their work became overwhelming. "You can't help everyone," one board member, a former single father named Patrick, reminded him during a particularly difficult meeting. Jerome had been trying to expand too quickly, to launch too many programs at once. "You're going to burn out if you keep trying. Focus on doing a few things excellently rather than many things adequately." The advice was exactly what Clayton would have said. Excellent, not adequate. Quality, not quantity. Make it matter. Jerome refined the foundation's focus: education, housing, and financial empowerment. 3 pillars, each executed with meticulous care. Her words became the heart of the museum, but the real legacy was already living outside those walls, in classrooms, in small businesses, in families who finally had room to breathe. Jerome's 3 pillars. 3 pillars held up everything Jerome built: education, housing, and financial empowerment. Each one supported several programs, all designed to work together so families could build real, lasting paths out of poverty instead of temporary escapes. Over time, those programs stopped feeling like charity and started feeling like infrastructure: quiet, solid systems that caught people before they fell and helped them climb instead of just survive. 2 years after the inheritance became public, on the anniversary of Clayton's passing, Jerome stood in the farmhouse study and recorded a video message that would play in the Heritage Center's final room. "My name is Jerome Walker," he began, looking straight into the camera. "2 years ago, I was working 3 jobs, barely keeping my head above water, and wondering if my son would ever have opportunities one never had. Then I inherited this farmhouse, this fortune, and this responsibility from a grandfather I barely knew." People constantly asked what it felt like to go from broke to wealthy almost overnight. They expected him to say it was incredible, that his problems vanished. "But the truth," he said, "is more complicated. Money solved my financial problems. It paid my debts, secured my son's future, and gave me a kind of safety I'd never known. But it also gave me a different kind of burden, the weight of knowing that what I do with this fortune matters. Not just to me, but to everyone who's still where I used to be. Honoring unseen excellence." Jerome spoke about Clayton, who had worked for Dolly Parton for 53 years. He explained that his grandfather earned his fortune through loyalty, hard work, and excellence in a job the world usually treats as invisible. He never saw it as just groundskeeping, Jerome said. He understood that caring for someone's home, their space, their peace, that's sacred work. And Dolly understood that too. That's why she made him a partner. That's why she transferred this wealth to him, and not out of obligation, but out of respect. "I'm using this inheritance to honor both of them," he continued. To honor Clayton's dedication and Dolly's generosity. To create opportunities for people who work hard but never catch a break. To remind the world that the measure of a life isn't fame or fortune. It's how you treat people, what you build, and whether you leave the world a little better than you found it. Then he looked directly into the lens, voice softer but steadier. "If you're watching this and you're struggling, I want you to know something. You're not invisible. Your work matters. Your dreams matter. You matter. And sometimes, when you least expect it, life hands you a key that unlocks everything. For me, it was literally a key to a farmhouse and a vault full of diamonds. For you, it might be a scholarship, a loan, a job opportunity, or just one person who believes in you. But it's coming. Don't give up before it arrives." Thank you for visiting this place. Thank you for learning about Dolly's music and Clayton's legacy. But most of all, thank you for remembering that every person has a story worth telling, and every story matters. The video ended on Jerome's face, still carrying traces of old fatigue, but lit from within by something new. Hopeful. Grounded. A man who had been broken and rebuilt, not into someone unrecognizable, but into a clearer version of who he'd always been. A new kind of homecoming. The Heritage Center's grand opening took place on a bright May afternoon, 3 years after Jerome had first driven up that long dirt driveway, terrified and curious in equal measure. Thousands of people showed up, artists who had worked with Dolly, local families, visitors who'd grown up on her songs, and residents of Ridgefield who'd watched the old place sit silent for years. As the crowd moved through the rooms, past the music, past the gold records, past the stories of one legendary star and one quiet groundskeeper, Jerome stood outside with Daniel, looking at the farmhouse glowing in the late sun. They weren't just visitors anymore. They were hosts, stewards of a legacy that blended fame and anonymity, money and meaning, struggle and possibility. The fortune hidden beneath the floorboards had changed their lives. But the real inheritance was everything it allowed them, and everyone who followed, to finally become. But Maya had insisted the first tour group be different. For Jerome, that first day felt like closing a circle that had been open his entire life. First visitors. Jerome had refused to let celebrities or VIP donors be the first to see the restored farmhouse. Instead, the inaugural tour group was made up of 20 single parents and their kids, all scholarship recipients from the foundation. They walked through the rooms ahead of everyone else, wide-eyed, taking in the gold records, the instruments, the photographs, and the quiet corners where an ordinary man had lived an extraordinary life of service. He guided them himself, but he lingered longest in the invisible workforce wing. There he showed them Clayton's modest room, the photos he'd tucked away, the journal pages that told more truth than any plaque on a wall. A mother named Jasmine, studying nursing while raising twin boys, stopped in front of Clayton's portrait. "He looks kind," she said softly. "He was," Jerome answered. "I didn't know him well, but I know he was kind." "Do you think he knew, when he was working out there in the fields, fixing fences, keeping this place together, do you think he knew his story would matter someday?" Jerome thought for a moment. "I think he knew his work mattered, whether anyone else recognized it or not. And maybe that's enough. Maybe knowing you're doing something meaningful is more important than whether the world applauds." Her boys ran up, breathless from the rehearsal room where they'd been allowed to pound on the drums. "Mom! Mom, can we come back? Can we learn music here?" "We'll see, babies," she said automatically. "You can," Jerome cut in. "We've got a youth program starting this summer. Bring them by. We'll set them up with instruments and lessons." Jasmine's eyes filled. "Why are you doing all this? You could just keep the money. Live anywhere you want. Do anything you want." "I am doing what I want," Jerome said simply. "This is what I want. Helping people isn't charity for me. It's healing. Every person I help is me 3 years ago. Every scholarship I award is the one I needed and never got. Every family I support is proof that none of us are meant to struggle alone." A different kind of speech. Daniel found him later on the front porch, watching the sunset turn the farmhouse walls to gold. He was 17 now, taller than Jerome, his face shedding its boyish roundness for the sharper lines of adulthood. "Dad, they want you to give a closing speech. You ready?" "I don't know. Am I?" Daniel grinned. "You've been ready your whole life. You just didn't know it." They walked back inside together. The entryway was full, neighbors and tourists, wealthy donors and hourly workers, famous faces and complete unknowns, all sharing the same space in a way that would have made both Dolly Parton and Clayton Walker proud. Jerome stepped up to the microphone. The room hushed. "I'm not great at speeches," he began, and soft laughter rippled through the crowd. "But I want to say something about inheritance. When most people think about inheritance, they think about money, property, things. And yes, I inherited those. But the real inheritance was something else. It was the knowledge that excellence matters. That loyalty is a kind of currency. That the work you do, no matter how invisible it seems to the world, has value. That's what my grandfather left me. Not just the contents of a vault, but a way of seeing the world. Dolly Parton wrote songs people will be singing long after we're all gone. But she also lived a life that honored the people who made that music possible. She saw Clayton not as a help, but as a partner. She respected his work enough to make him wealthy. And he respected that trust enough to protect what she gave him for someone who would use it well. I hope I'm using it right. He glanced at Daniel in the front row, at Jasmine and her boys, at Beth and Olivia, at the scholarship recipients, the new employees, the townspeople whose lives had quietly shifted because one man had stayed loyal and one woman had decided to share her spotlight. That's the real story here, Jerome said. Not that a broke single dad found $150 million in diamonds under a farmhouse, but that dignity and excellence, no matter where you practice them, can change the world for people you may never even meet. I hope this Heritage Center teaches people not just about Dolly's music, but about the invisible people who make all music possible. I hope the foundation helps families build lives they're proud of. I hope that someday, 50 years from now, someone stands where I'm standing and says, Jerome Walker honored his inheritance. He didn't just spend it, he multiplied it. Not in dollars, but in lives changed, in opportunities created, in dignity restored. My grandfather used to say, or at least I imagine he did, that the measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. Not just money, but attention, respect, love. So tonight, I want to give something to all of you. I want to give you permission to see yourselves the way Clayton saw himself, as someone whose work matters, whose life has meaning, whose story is worth telling. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about this place, these stories, this legacy. And thank you for reminding me that sometimes the best inheritance is the chance to become who you were always meant to be. The applause was deafening. People stood cheering, some crying. Daniel embraced him tightly. Grandfather would be proud, he whispered. Yeah, Jerome whispered back. I think he would be. The quiet morning after. The next morning, Jerome woke early in his modest house, the one he'd bought for $350,000 and never regretted, and drove to the farmhouse alone. He let himself in with his key and walked through the quiet halls, past the exhibits now open to the public, up the stairs to the second floor. He stood in Clayton's room, which had been preserved exactly as it was, the hand-stitched quilt, the simple furniture, the photograph of his father holding baby Jerome. This room told the truth about his grandfather, that he'd chosen simplicity, chosen purpose, chosen dignity over display. Jerome sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone. He opened the Photos app and scrolled back to the pictures they'd taken of the vault 3 years ago. The bearer bonds, the stock certificates, the jewelry and diamonds glittering in the flashlight beam, $287 million. But when he thought about his inheritance now, those images weren't what came to mind. Instead, he thought about Jasmine's twin boys pounding on the drums. He thought about Olivia Sanders, the daughter of a housekeeper, studying to become a teacher. He thought about the 200 scholarship recipients whose lives had shifted because someone believed they deserved opportunities. He thought about Daniel, confident and kind, learning to be wealthy without losing his humanity. He thought about a town revived, businesses growing, people working with pride. He thought about all the letters he received weekly from people who'd visited the Heritage Center and saw themselves in Clayton's story, who felt seen for the first time in their lives. That was the inheritance that mattered. Jerome stood and walked to the window. The sun was rising over the North Carolina hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere out there were people waking up to their own struggles, wondering if today would be the day things finally changed, if today would bring the break they'd been praying for. He couldn't help everyone. But he could help some, and those some would help others. And slowly, life by life, story by story, the ripple from one hidden vault in one forgotten farmhouse began to spread. Ripples of real wealth. Jerome watched that idea take shape in front of him, that true wealth isn't what you stockpile, it's what you give away in ways that outlive you. It wasn't about bank balances or appraisals anymore. It was about scholarships granted, keys handed to first-time homeowners, businesses that opened because someone finally said yes to a dream the world had ignored. Each life that shifted sent its own small wave outward, touching others he would never meet. One quiet morning, standing again at the farmhouse window, he realized that if the work kept growing, if the foundation stayed focused, if the people it helped went on to help others, then maybe, someday, whole communities would begin to see wealth differently. Not as a number, but as a responsibility. Not as something you hoard, but as something you build with and leave behind. Ordinary rituals, extraordinary change. He pulled out his phone and added a line to his growing list: expand scholarship fund. Double recipients next year. Explore partnerships with more schools. There was so much more to do. The work was only just beginning. Jerome locked up the farmhouse and drove back to his modest house, stopping at the same grocery store where he used to count every dollar, buying the same coffee he'd bought for years. Some things didn't need an upgrade. The small routines that kept him anchored, the cheap brand he actually liked, the familiar cashier who knew his name, were worth protecting. At home, Daniel was already at the stove. "Morning, Dad." "Pancakes." "You know I can't resist your pancakes." They ate in comfortable silence, like they always had. The kitchen was nicer now, the house safer, the future wider. But the important thing, the easy back and forth between them, the love that had gotten them through nights with overdue bills and empty cupboards, that hadn't changed at all. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked. "Just how lucky I am." "Because of the money." "Because of the people," Jerome said. "Grandfather, even though I barely knew him. You are my partner through all of this. The families we're helping. All the stories we get to be part of now." He smiled. "The money's nice, but it's not the treasure. The people are the treasure." Daniel snorted. "That's pretty corny, Dad." "Yeah, well, I earned the right to be corny." They both laughed, and in that sound was everything that actually mattered: joy after years of fear, connection where isolation used to live, hope standing stubbornly where despair once felt permanent. The real inheritance. Anyone can inherit money. Paper can move from one name to another with a signature. But inheriting purpose, inheriting dignity, inheriting the unshakable knowledge that your life and your work matter, that's the kind of fortune no vault can fully hold. Jerome Walker inherited $287 million and $150 million of that in diamonds hidden under a farmhouse floor. But what truly changed his life was inheriting his grandfather's belief that excellence matters, that invisible work has value, and that showing up fully, day after day, even when no one seems to notice, is its own form of greatness. The foundation, the heritage center, the scholarships, the small businesses, the letters from strangers who saw themselves in Clayton's story, all of that was just the beginning. Jerome hadn't escaped his old life so much as expanded it, turning private struggle into shared strength. Because in the end, people aren't remembered for what they owned. They're remembered for what they gave, what they built, and who they helped rise. And Jerome Walker was only getting started. Up next, more powerful stories are waiting for you. Keep going if you believe that the most valuable inheritances aren't always the ones you can lock in a safe, they're the ones that change who you become and remind you that every person, every story, and every life carries a worth that can't be counted in dollars, only multiplied through love, purpose, and the courage to honor those who came before.